Global climate change poses a threat to coastal communities of humans and wildlife alike. Recent modeling data predicts a global sea level rise of 1 meter by the year 2100. The human actions behind climate change and sea level rise cannot be denied, and urgent actions to undertake risk management efforts in coastal areas are needed to prevent disaster. Since the 1950s, human influence has had a larger effect on climate than natural forces. The continued loss of glacial ice and thermal expansion account for the majority of sea level rise occurring today under current emissions scenarios. Because sea level rise responds slowly to changes in greenhouse gas emissions, changes that are already occurring cannot be stopped immediately. Even under the best emissions scenarios, the current rate of sea level rise would continue for centuries or millennia. It is therefore critical that geospatial models be created on a local scale to predict the changes that will take place in coastal regions. In the Gulf Coast region, coastal land is reduced 5 millimeters or more per year. The withdrawal of groundwater, especially along the western part of the Gulf Coast region, has amplified relative sea level rise. For example, the intermediate high global sea level rise scenario predicts a rise of 1.5 meters. However, along the Gulf Coast, that prediction is 0.2 to 1 meter higher. The black rail is a secretive marsh bird that makes its home in coastal areas, including the Gulf Coast. They inhabit high elevation areas of salt marshes, specifically the zone between the mean high water line and the highest level of the marsh. This area is typically no deeper than 1.2 inches, leaving it particularly susceptible to changes in sea level rise, as they can quickly become inundated and unsuitable for the black rail. Population numbers for the black rail along the Gulf Coast are declining. The United States currently lists the black rail as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, and the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species lists them as endangered. The loss of nesting habitat is a major contributor to their decline. The submergence of salt marsh habitat due to rising sea levels and erosion both reduce the foraging and nesting area available to support black rail populations. The Gulf Coast Joint Venture is dedicated to habitat conservation of priority species such as the black rail. Their initiative area runs from the southern tip of Texas and ranges along the coastal portions of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. A primary focus of this organization involves on-the-ground efforts to restore wetland areas and ensure adequate coastline habitat remains suitable for marsh bird species like the black rail. Using ArcGIS Pro, this study will utilize National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicted scenario feature layers, representing low to extreme sea level inundation, and compare them to the known habitat of the black rail within the joint venture initiative area. This will be further cross-referenced with abundance data provided by eBird to determine which area is at greatest threat of inundation and habitat loss for the black rail. Various maps will be produced illustrating the areas where the joint venture must take action to prevent habitat loss of the black rail and other marsh species. By performing this analysis, Areas identified as black rail habitat under threat from sea level rise will be identified, and a management plan to prevent loss of the species can be developed.